Just really looking for a lot of help right now.
Hey, listen, don't worry about it, man. I got you, bro. I got you.
I got you. Trust me.
You can trust me. I got your back.
Look, trust me, man. I got you.
Don't worry. I got you.
Confía en mí, todo va a estar bien.
So the Gallup organization does an ethics poll every year where they rank how much people trust, the general public, trust people in different professions. And at the top of the list, and has been at the top of the list for a number of years, is nurses, which makes no sense to me because we all know how shady nurses are, right? But in a surprise to no one, members of Congress rank dead last every single year. But the interesting part, at least for me personally, was that pastors are right in the middle of the pack. We are 11 out of 22, right behind chiropractors, which, I mean, I like and trust chiropractors, but we also barely edge out labor union leaders, which makes me feel really weird because it's kind of like we're starting this series on trust, and people like me rank just ahead of the guys who lead organizations that you can't opt out of. And if you don't go along with what they want, they send some nice folks over to your house to persuade you to go along with it. So who knows if you can trust anything that I'm going to say during this series, but I promise to actually try to do my best. And if I can't persuade you, maybe we'll send some of our beefier ushers over towards your place to see if we can get you to see things my way. But honestly, so I believe actually in all of the series that we do around here, we put a lot of time and effort and energy and prayer and thought into the conversations that we bring to bear and that we have as a faith community. And honestly, I believe like each and every week has the potential to change your life. But I really think that there's something different about this series just because it touches on something that's so personal and core to all of our lives. Like I'm convinced that the truth that we're going to unpack together during this series has the power to have a massive and immediate impact in a whole bunch of different areas of your life, no matter what your starting point is this morning when it comes to faith or where you're at in your relationships or what your family dynamic is like, that there can actually be some forward progress, that you can take some giant steps forward in your life. Now, you'd think that a conversation about trust in church would only be about how God is trustworthy and how you need to trust him. And we will definitely talk about that at different points all month long. But if that was all there was to a conversation about trust, like truthfully, well, it wouldn't really be that big of an issue for us then, because it's people that are the problem, right? Like they're the ones that mess us up, which is maddening and makes things complicated for us because no matter how independent or introverted you are, you cannot live the kind of life you want to live without trusting human beings at some point. You just can't. And so in our culture, like we have this tension that we're constantly caught up in because we are always fighting for our autonomy and to express our uniqueness and our freedom to stand out and even stand alone from other people. But then we don't always know how to fight our way back to community and belonging and connection and love and relationship with people. And the challenge, of course, and I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but human beings aren't super trustworthy. I mean, raise your hand if you have trust issues. No, you don't have to raise your hand, but we all have trust issues, right? Like a lot of us do, if we're honest. We have, at some level, we have some kind of trust issue. So I saw a meme this week about the reasons that there are for not trusting people. And there it is, the two reasons. You know them and you don't know them. Those are the reasons for not trusting. And that's one of those, like, it's funny because it's true, right? Because the older we get, the more our experiences tell us that we just can't trust very many people, if anyone at all. I mean, how many times has somebody said to you in your life, trust me, right before the big letdown? or right before everything fell apart, or right before you followed them into a mess. And if you're like me, that's been a lot. That's happened a lot for you, or at least it feels like it. See, I think the unspoken reality is that we all know the heartache of discovering that somebody that we trusted let us down or betrayed us, whether it was a teammate or a coworker or a spiritual leader or a friend or one of our kids or our parents or our spouse, somebody that we loved, that we cared about, let us down. They broke our trust. They failed us. They betrayed us. The truth is, and when that trust is severed, we're the ones that always suffer, right? And maybe just thinking about trust and maybe just thinking about the moments where trust has been broken for you makes you, feel nauseous even thinking about it right now. One of the things I love about the scriptures is just how accurately they describe the human experience. So there's a place in the Old Testament where there's a guy named Micah. He was a prophet, and he wrote something that's, I think, pretty jaded. And he wrote it during a time when things were not just bad for him personally, but they were particularly dark for all the people of Israel. And so he wrote about his trust issues this way in Micah chapter 7, verses 5 and 6. It says this. It says, "Do not trust your neighbor. Put no confidence in a friend. Even with the woman who lies in your embrace, guard the words of your lips. For a son dishonors a father, a daughter rises up against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the members of his own household." So I always on Saturdays have my wife read through all of my notes and, read through like the stuff I'm going to talk about. And so she was reading this and she got to that part. I had no idea where she's at when she's reading my notes, but she's like, "I like this Micah guy. Like he's got some... He's been through some stuff, all right? Like, I'm down with this." And maybe when you hear that, you're like, that might be the truest thing I've ever heard in church was those verses, what that guy said. Those are my life verses. A man's enemies are the people of his own household. I get that tattooed on my chest. Because we've all been there, right? Like, we're not sure who we can trust. And it feels like it's just us. Like, life is just on us. Like, we're on our own, ultimately. There were people we thought we could trust, and so we did, but then something happened, and now we know that we can't trust them. And so we start wondering if there's anybody out there who's worthy of trust. Maybe the worst part is that we don't always know why something didn't work when it stops working, or why something failed when it failed. We just know that we have the scars to prove that it failed. And so we keep our distance and we hold people at arm's length and we wall ourselves off, all in an effort to protect ourselves from the pain of that broken trust. And so we go, "Okay, God," like if you're a follower of Jesus, you're a person of faith, we have a tendency to go, "Okay, God, it's just you and me. It's just you and me." And we say things like, "Never again. I trust God. I just don't trust people." Ever heard somebody say that? Maybe you've said that. Like, "I trust God. It's people." Like the challenging thing is that God actually never really lets us go there. Like that's not an okay arrangement for him. So there's a moment in the story of God's people in the Old Testament where he says something extraordinary to a guy named Moses. It's found in the book of Exodus in chapter 19. It's right after the people of Israel have been delivered out of slavery, generations of slavery in Egypt, and they've made their exodus out of Egypt, and Moses is leading them, and they go into the desert, and they're trying to establish this relationship with God and with one another, and between Moses and the people, and so in Exodus 19 it says this in verse 7, it says, "So Moses went back and he summoned the elders of all the people, and he set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. And the people all responded together, 'We will do everything the Lord has said.' And so that sounded good to Moses, so he brought their answer back to the Lord. And so far so good. Everything was looking good. It was sounding good. The people were like, 'Cool, like we hear you. Like, God, you've done so much for us. Like, and we can, like you can go back and tell God that we'll do everything that he said.' And that seemed good enough to Moses, but it wasn't good enough for God, because look at what is said in the very next verse. It says, 'The Lord says to Moses, I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud.' Why? So he can show off? No. 'So that the people will hear me speaking with you, and they will always put their trust in you.'" Wait. Time out. I thought we were supposed to put our trust in God. I thought he's the one that we're following. But here God's like, I'm going to come down so that everybody can hear me speaking to you, Moses, and they will always, he uses the word always, they will always put their trust in you. They'll follow you. They'll believe you. See, I think one of the recurring themes when you start to read the scriptures and read the stories of the people of God is essentially over and over and over again, people are saying to God, God, we trust you. It's other people that we're not that big of fans of. And so let's just keep things tight between us and it'll all be okay. And God's always like, yeah, that doesn't work. That's not how I created you. That's not how I designed you to live. See, let me give you maybe the most challenging truth that you're going to hear all month long. And that is this, that your ability to trust other people affects your ability to trust God. Your ability to trust others affects your ability to trust God. They are connected. They just are. How could they not be? Human beings are made in the image of God. So if you can't trust anyone and everyone is a reflection of God, eventually you'll have a hard time trusting the God that all those people are reflecting. On the flip side, it's also true that the more that we lean in and learn to trust God, the more that God will lead us towards connecting with and trusting other people. In fact, if you don't learn how to connect to and trust people, your faith will eventually start to feel superficial. It'll eventually start feeling hollow. You probably won't connect the dots, but you'll have moments where you start to blame God because you can't feel him anymore. You start feeling like he's not coming through for you. See, because the primary context through which we feel God, through which we experience God, and God comes through for us is through other people. And that's why a setting like this, that's why being connected in a church and having people that share your faith and their lives are on the same path and moving down that journey with you, that's why that matters. And so when you get disconnected from a place where you're gathering around people who are connected to God, you start having a much more difficult time sensing and feeling and experiencing God. I mean, think about your life and your faith and just your experience and let that sink in, that your faith and your trust in God is connected to the trust and connection you have with other people. Your ability to trust God is connected to your ability to trust other people. And this is, I think, why the scriptures are jam-packed with conversation from beginning to end about how we treat and relate to one another. Because it's not just the relationships with one another that suffer when we betray, when we fail, when we break trust. It's that our relationships with God are impacted, our ability to trust God. Let me give you an example. So in 1 Corinthians 13, it's this beautiful declaration of God's heart and his intention for how we should treat one another. And I reference this a lot. It comes up a lot on Sundays. But it was written by a guy named Paul. And as he's writing it, he starts off talking about all this like supernatural stuff and all this spiritual stuff. And he says all that stuff matters and it's important. It's all powerful and wonderful. But then he says it's also secondary, as important as it is, it's secondary to the power of love and trust, to connecting with human beings. And he goes on to describe in detail what it looks like. And right in the middle of him making his point in 1 Corinthians 13, he says this in verses 6 and 7. He says, love does not delight in evil. Love rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts. It always trusts. It always trusts. It always trusts. It always hopes. And it always perseveres. See, when we read that, I don't think he's actually describing four different things. I think he's describing one thing four different ways. That when love delights in truth, that it always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, it always perseveres. See, the core of love is trust. And if you lose trust, you'll lose hope. If you lose trust, you'll lose your capacity to persevere. If you lose trust, you will lose your desire to protect. Without trust, love dries up and starves. And that is the ironic and complicated and messy and almost sort of cruel joke feeling part of this, right? Is that trust is essential for deep relationships and connection and intimacy, and also, asterisk, that the people that you trust will not always be trustworthy. In fact, some of them won't be trustworthy at all. And even worse than that, the people who trust you may discover that you're not trustworthy. No. I mean, it's never us, right? We've been completely trustworthy our whole lives. I don't know about you, but it's not like, it's super embarrassing. It's not something I'm proud of, but I have betrayed and hurt people that I love. I've betrayed people that trusted me. I've broken trust before. See, the reality is that trust actually starts with us. If we want a world where people can be trusted, we have to choose to be somebody who is trustworthy. We have to be worthy of trust. And I don't know if you noticed in the verses that we read in 1 Corinthians 13, when Paul, he says in verse 6, where it all begins, he says, love rejoices in the truth. And let me tell you what you already know. There's a connection between trust and truth. It's funny, isn't it, how our language gives us away, that we say things like, okay, just let me be honest. And wait, were you not being honest before? Or can I just tell you the truth? I mean, I hope. Have you been lying the whole time? Or let me just be straight up with you. Were you being crooked before? Have you ever just made a decision to lie? Anybody? Okay, think way back when you were much younger, a long time ago. I feel like we were all just exposed for liars because nobody admitted that they've lied. So, okay, it'll just be me. Like I've made a decision to lie before, and what I realized is that most of the time when I chose to lie, it's because I feared the consequences of the truth. And I didn't fear the consequences of the truth for them. I feared the consequences of the truth for me. See, you cannot separate truth from trust. And because of that, you cannot separate truth from love. And so the way we become a person of trust is by becoming a person of truth. See, the number of people that are in your life that you can trust is a huge deal. But the number of people in your life that can trust you is an even bigger deal. And we don't ever think about our side of the equation in that way, because we can only experience what it's like on our end of what happened. You need people in your life that you can trust, but you also need lots of people in your life who can trust you, who, when you give your word, when you speak something, they know that you're speaking the truth. And so in Luke 16, Jesus lays out this incredible truth about trust. And he's in the middle of this teaching that's primarily about money and finances and generosity and materialism. But he lays out this principle that's really powerful. It's in Luke 16. And this is what he says in verse 10. This is Jesus speaking. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches, which, by the way, are people, relationships? Verse 12, and if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? I think what's so interesting about what Jesus is saying is that he's describing this principle that's at work in our spiritual lives, for sure, between us and God. That we only think about our side of the equation, even with God, is can God be trusted? But there's also this element in what Jesus is saying is like, can I be trusted by God? Because there's things that God wants to do in your life. There's things that God wants to entrust to you, God wants to put into your life. But if he were to do that, it would just make a bigger mess of things. Because he's going, I don't know if I can trust you. I have to just trust you with this little part. But it's not just a spiritual principle between us and God. It's also the imagery for how things work in a very practical and real way in our life. That trust starts in small things, right? Like the way that we treat and do small things is the way that we treat and do everything. And so Jesus points out that when we learn to trust people, that people will trust us in return. That trust always expands our world and opens up opportunities for us. Because when we're trustworthy with a little bit, we get more. See, if you can't trust anyone but yourself, You can only handle a world big enough for just you. And I don't know about you, but knowing me, a world that's only big enough for me is a really, really, really small world. It's a really small story. But the more that you trust God and the more that you become trustworthy and the more that you trust others, the bigger your world becomes. As I was thinking through this series and I started thinking back through relationships and people in my life, what occurred to me is that many of the most trustworthy people I've ever known in my life have also been the most trusting people I've ever known in my life. I've never known somebody who was incredibly trustworthy and super cynical of other people. Isn't that interesting? Don't let the betrayal of one person in your life define every person in your life. Don't project the pain of your life onto people who didn't hurt you. But also notice that Jesus is not just telling us that we got to just suck it up and get over it and just trust everybody. He's not telling us to trust blindly, not at all. Because the principle he lays out is actually the opposite. I mean, what Jesus is saying is that trust isn't awarded, it's actually earned. Don't trust just anyone. Trust those who have proven trustworthy. Don't give the big stuff to people who haven't been proven trustworthy of even the little stuff. And this is huge. I don't want you to miss this because this is the exact opposite of what we do. Most of us trust people based on feelings or gut instincts. We like somebody, they're likable, and so we trust them. The more we like them, the more we trust them. The problem is we've all had our feelings and our gut instincts be completely wrong about somebody. And so now our gut, after a while, after that happens a couple times where you trust your gut to trust somebody and your gut was wrong, then your gut starts telling you to trust nobody. When we got hurt, we didn't learn and grow. We became cynical and started calling it, well, we just wised up. See, one of the core truths of the scriptures is that you and I, that we are loved so that we can love others. That you and I, that we are blessed so that we can be a blessing to others. That we are entrusted so that we can entrust others. Which brings it all the way back to Jesus himself. See, the way to not become bitter, the way to not become cynical, the way to not lose your ability to trust in people is to realize that God is the singular relationship that will never let you down. In John chapter 10, verses 11 through 14, Jesus is using a metaphor describing himself and his relationship with us. And he says this, he says, I am the good shepherd. And the good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. And so when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away, and the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. And the man runs away because he is a hired hand and he cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Now, maybe you bristle at the idea of being described as a sheep. I mean, because in our culture, we want to be powerful and strong. In fact, we have, slogans and stickers and memes about not being a sheep. And, we don't want to be weak and defenseless, but Jesus is the one that used this metaphor, not me. So if you have a beef with it, your beef is with him. But here's the thing. From God's perspective, which, by the way, God's perspective is reality. From God's perspective, we are sheep because we're needy and we're vulnerable and we're anxious and we're impulsive. We're our own worst enemy. We're easily picked off. We easily lose our way. And part of the reason why we're easily picked off and part of the reason why we easily lose our way is because we're prone to trust in people and things that aren't trustworthy. That we tend to trust anyone and anything that makes us feel strong and safe. If we trust anyone and anything that makes us feel like we can eliminate, like we're no longer weak or vulnerable. And so Jesus comes along and he says, I'm the good shepherd. I'm the one that loves you. I love the sheep. That I'm not like the hired hand who's only in it for the ways in which that relationship will benefit him, who only wants, a relationship with you and I for the ways that it can benefit them. And so the question in this text is, why should these sheep trust this shepherd? And Jesus answers it beautifully. In verse 11, he says, you should trust me because I'm willing to sacrifice myself on your behalf. In verse 12, he says, you should trust me because I'm the only one capable of protecting you and I will never abandon you. In verse 13, you can trust me because unlike the hired hand, the shepherd cares so deeply for the sheep that he places their needs above his own. In verse 14, he says, you can trust the good shepherd because he spent so much time with the sheep. He spent so much time reaching out to you and loving you that he knows them all and they know him. See, the sheep in this story, they trust the shepherd not because of the shepherd's position or because he told them to or because they feel obligated to, but because the shepherd has proven trustworthy. And that's the thing with you and I, that Jesus invites you to trust him, not because he said so, not just because he's God, but because he's proven trustworthy. Because he has loved you, that he has placed your needs above his own, because he laid down his life for you, because he'll never leave you or turn his back on you. See, I don't know what your church experience has been, but I can tell you that God never shames anybody into trusting him. Instead, he does the opposite. He humbles himself again and again and again and again to earn your trust, to prove to you that he is trustworthy. Not because he has to, but because he loves you. We have the opportunity every year to spend some time on vacation near the ocean, and I love the ocean. My wife loves the beach. I hate the beach. I love the water. So when we go to the beach, she's on the sand, never in the water. I'm always in the water and never on the sand. And we've been taking our kids to the coast and to the ocean since they were little. And because she doesn't go in the water, I'm always the one that has to drag them into the water and get them used to the waves and get them used to the ocean. And it's been an interesting experience with all of them because they all have different fears. They all have different levels of courage going in. They've all been different places. There's always a moment where I have to kind of force them because the waves feel a little too big, a little too intimidating. But I always get them and I always have them look me in the eye and I always have them come back to, hey, they're trusting their dad. But I'm not forcing them to do something, that I'm right there with them, and that as their dad, sometimes when the big wave comes, I snatch them up and I hold them and I protect them and I let the wave crash on me. And sometimes what looks like a big wave, but I know that they can handle, I just step out of the way and I let it smash them. Because otherwise they'll never learn. The thing I say all the time, never turn your back on the ocean, never turn your back on the ocean, never turn your back, and pretty soon they're like face planted into the sand. But every time that I take them out into the water, it's always them watching, and then the ocean, the waves are coming in, and I always just reach my hand out. I get a little farther than they can reach me, and I invite them to trust me. See, that is what God is doing with you and I this morning, that he reaches his hand out to you, and you don't even know the times where the wave's been coming, and he's scooped you up, and he's protected you from it crashing on you. And yeah, there's been times where you trusted somebody you shouldn't, or there was times where he let that wave kind of crash over your head and it was uncomfortable and not great, and you thought you were going to drown, but he knew you weren't because he was standing nearby to make sure. See, I think part of the reason that so many of us have trust issues is because we put our trust in the wrong places. We foolishly trusted hired hands that we thought were for us. They looked trustworthy. They maybe even were part of a church, or they maybe even represented God. And so there was good reason to trust them. But when things got tough, they abandoned us, or they showed their true colors. And now we take all of that hurt and all of that pain and all of that skepticism and cynicism, and we project all of that onto God. But I want to challenge you this morning that you don't define God by your relationships, that you define your relationships by who God is. That you don't use your relationships and the track record you'd had in relationships and project that onto God, but you would actually take God's faithfulness and his trustworthiness to you, and you would project that onto your relationships. That you can trust the Good Shepherd and let him begin to teach you how to trust, or how to trust again, and how to be trustworthy. See, I think the reason this is such a big deal is that no matter how strong you are, no matter how you're wired personality-wise, the kind of connection, the kind of contentment, the kind of calm and peace that you were created to live in, they all require trust. That's why trust matters. And you can hate that. You can wish it wasn't true, but it's the way that God made you. It's the way that God made us. That you were created to love and be loved, to know people and be known, to be grounded and satisfied and fulfilled, to live in security and intimacy and peace. And all of that requires trust. All of it does. That is what this series is about. There are different kinds of trust and different kinds of relationships for different needs. And so next week, we're actually going to get really practical, and we're going to actually talk about what it looks like, what it takes to build trust, because there is a process. But I knew we couldn't go there without starting here. See, trust matters because who you trust defines you. And when you decide to trust God with your life begins to be defined by the character of God. When you trust God and his love, you begin to love truth and good. When you trust God, you start to see the beautiful and the good and to move toward trusting people. When you trust in God and his love and his strength, it makes you strong enough to face any betrayal that comes your way. And when you trust God, your life starts moving in the direction of being more trustworthy. And so that's where I kind of want to end this morning. That's the thing that I want to assign you as homework. That's the thing that I want to challenge you to do and invite you to participate in, is that you would take a moment. Don't assume you know the answers. I promise you, you don't. But you would take a moment and ask a couple people that are close to you 2 questions. Is it easy to trust me? And do you feel trusted by me? And then be quiet. And don't be defensive. And don't say, yeah, but, and oh yeah, well, you're dumb, or like whatever. Just listen to what they say. Because I promise you, their answers are going to be different than your answers. And hopefully, if you've done the work and it's a healthy relationship, the gap between your answers and their answers is smaller than maybe you would think. But their answers are going to be different. Is it easy to trust me? Do you feel trusted by me? Can you imagine the impact on our church, in your family, in our community, in your life, if we all decided that we're going to be more trustworthy, that we're going to live closer to the truth, because truth and trust are connected. Truth and love are connected. Can you imagine the seeds of trust that'll be planted in your relationships? And they don't grow up and crop up overnight. But if you will take the time to reach out and have conversations and begin by having a conversation with God. Let's pray together.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you and thank you for watching our online service today.